Ecuador's energy crisis has been annoying, to say the least, but it is seemingly coming to an end. Why seemingly? Well, the government has announced that the blackouts will end on December 20th, 2024. That's great, of course, but some energy experts have expressed their doubts about this. So in this video, we're going to look at what the current sources of energy are in Ecuador, the thoughts of energy experts on the future of the blackouts in Ecuador, some thoughts sent to me by a subscriber who's been working in the solar industry, and of course my final thoughts as to how the energy situation is going to be moving forward. So let's start with what the specific sources of energy production in Ecuador are, but keep in mind that the specific numbers for these sources are kind of all over the place, due to the differences in date and time. So to start with, we can look at this chart from December 15th, which is the date I recorded this video. You can also find one for the specific date you're watching by using the link you'll see at the bottom of the screen, or by searching on Google "Cenace Tiempo Real." Using this chart, we can get an idea of what a day with a short 3-hour blackout looks like. And you can also see the division of the production of energy. I also have a chart from November 15th that I found on a news article online so that you can look at and compare the two. To go into specifics of how much each plant's installed capacity is, I went to ChatGPT to help me with this and got the following values. In hydroelectric plants, we have Coca-Cola Sinclair, which the installed capacity is of 1,500 megawatts. Then we have Paute Complex, which has a combined capacity of approximately 1,075 megawatts. Then we have Sopladora, which has a capacity of 487 megawatts. After that, we have Minas San Francisco with a capacity of 270 megawatts. Then we have just San Francisco with a capacity of 230 megawatts. After that, we have Agoyan with a capacity of 156 megawatts. Then we have one that's called Del Citanizagua, which has a capacity of 180 megawatts. After that, we have Toachipilaton, which has a capacity of 254 megawatts. Then we have Manduriacu, which has a capacity of 65 megawatts. Then to end off the hydroelectric plants, we have Quijos with a capacity of 50 megawatts. As for thermal power plants, we have Esmeralda's thermal power plant, which has a capacity of 232 megawatts. And then Enrique Garcia Thermal Power Plant Station with a capacity of 102 megawatts. Then in terms of renewable energy projects, we have Bionaco Wind Farm with a capacity of 16.5 megawatts and solar projects in the Galapagos Islands with a capacity of 1.5 megawatts. The total installed capacity for hydroelectric is approximately 4,267 megawatts. For thermal, approximately 334 megawatts, and for renewable, wind and solar, we have approximately 18 megawatts. This brings the total installed capacity to around 4,619 megawatts. The total demand of energy in Ecuador is approximately 4,000 megawatts. And while Ecuador's total installed capacity theoretically meets the national demand, the actual generation has of course been compromised due to environmental factors impacting hydroelectric plants. As a bonus, I asked ChatGPT to do a fun little exercise to show us how much megawatt hour is produced in Ecuador and how much is actually needed for a year. The amount it generates is approximately 20,790,765 megawatt hour. And the amount needed is 36,683,000 megawatt hour, which even ChatGPT agrees would mean a need for imports and rationing in order to meet the national demand. Now we move on to the thoughts of energy experts, and there's a few different things that they have to say. To start with, we have the words of the president of the College of Electrical and Electronic Engineers of Azuay, Diego Morales. He had considered that in the best of cases, it will rain throughout December, and in the last week there's the possibility of there being no blackouts. And in order for this to happen, he talks about 5 different scenarios. The first is that there are the necessary rains, because this reduces the possibility that the Mazar Reservoir is out of service, and thus we can count on the 1,757 megawatts of the Paute integral hydroelectric complex made up of the Mazar, Molino, and Sopladora power plants. In addition, if it rains in the Amazon, we can count on Coca-Cola Sinclair, which has a power of 1,500 megawatts. The second scenario is the incorporation of thermal energy. The third is that the purchase of energy from Colombia is maintained. The fourth scenario is that the Aluriquín power plant of the Toachi Pilatón complex comes into operation. And then the final scenario is that an energy efficiency plan is implemented at the national level. Then we move on to an article that asks if there's going to be blackouts in 2025. And there are reasons, according to the article, that experts believe that they will. To start with, it states that although President Daniel Noboa announced that power cuts will end from December 20th, 2024, he has failed to ensure the definitive end of the energy crisis affecting Ecuador. This is because the industrial zone, which accounts for approximately 30% of national energy consumption, will be without power between December 15th and the 31st. Then we have the words of Fernando Salinas, an electrical engineer who points out that this saving strategy will allow the government to fulfill its promise to avoid blackouts in the residential sector, but he also warns that it has a political rather than a technical background. He even states that the goal is to maintain electricity service on the holidays, but that the blackouts will return in January. Salinas goes on to state that the energy deficit amounts to 1,800 megawatts, and he also warns that the import from Colombia does not represent a sustainable technical solution due to the physical limitations of the transmission lines and the fact that the sale is not guaranteed in the long term. The article also asks if the energy crisis will be alleviated by rain. It states that for the situation to improve, the rains must be concentrated in key areas, such as Coca-Cola Sinclair and the Mazar Reservoir. Salinas even says that the dry season affects every year between October and March, and although in December the rain usually begins, this does not ensure that the reservoirs will recover enough. He had even previously warned that the rationings could be extended until 2026 due to the annual increase of 8% in the energy demand. Now I'm going to read you some thoughts from a subscriber who's also concerned with the energy situation and who happens to have knowledge on renewable energy sources. So this person says that when it comes to Ecuador, the energy crisis you're facing is alarming. With failing thermal plants and a lack of rainfall, the situation is dire. This brings us to the subject of renewable energy, something that this person is deeply passionate about. Since 2013, they've been working with the solar industry and they truly believe in the transformative potential of renewables. Ecuador has an incredible opportunity here, not only with solar and wind, but also with geothermal energy, thanks to volcanic activity in the region. There's 1,000 megawatts of solar and wind projects that have been approved for years in Ecuador, but the government hasn't figured out a payment mechanism, so they have chosen to do nothing. They also mention that it's puzzling to them that so much is being spent on stopgap measures rather than investing in infrastructure that could serve Ecuador for decades to come. The focus on fixing outdated thermal plants instead of integrating renewables, which would cost less in the long run, is baffling. They're also surprised that the Chinese, who have been heavily involved in building other infrastructure in Ecuador, haven't stepped in to develop renewable energy projects, which they are very good at. And now I'll talk about my thoughts on the energy crisis moving forward. And to start with, I'll give a little bit of feedback on the things that I just mentioned. First of all, we have the situation that the energy expert mentioned with the rain. And I think we can all agree, Ecuadorian or not, that obviously if the majority of power is being produced by hydroelectric plants, that rainfall is going to temporarily solve this situation. And of course, I have to make an emphasis on temporarily because the rainy season does not last forever. This is especially due to the fact that we have a situation with climate change. As we saw, we're in the middle of this crisis, not just because of incompetence, which is something I'll talk about later, but also because of the drought that we underwent. That's why I do agree with the energy experts that there will be blackouts in 2025 unless there's some form of energy diversification that the country decides to implement in this coming year. And I would agree with what my subscriber said about how it's baffling that Ecuador doesn't invest in other forms of renewable energy, but at the same time, I'm not surprised because I just gotten used to how this country works. Realistically, and I've talked about this before, there's always a situation with corruption that completely destroys the country. The possibility of investing and reducing or completely eliminating this problem before it even started was completely shattered when previous governments decided to invest the people's funds in lining their own pockets. Regardless of how much we love the country, everyone is aware that viveza criolla, something I've talked about on this channel before, is just something that is never going to be eliminated and has resulted in things like this, the stealing of money, the inability to look towards the future and look more towards the immediate gain for a person or a specific group of people, instead of looking out for the country as a whole and making it so that problems like these don't even happen in the first place. And part of my own thoughts and assumptions is that the people here are always looking for a short-term solution instead of looking towards the long term in order to avoid problems in the future. In the case of this energy crisis, it was easier for governments to avoid investing in solar power or renewable sources of energy because they were more expensive in order to have more money for themselves by investing in something that was cheaper, such as the hydroelectric options. And while this is a different example altogether, I do remember the situation with the earthquake that happened in Puerto Viejo, where a lot of houses were destroyed, a lot of buildings were shattered by the earthquake that happened due to poor construction quality. And this poor construction quality came from a mix of the people themselves hiring maestros, which are workers who are cheaper than professionals, but are obviously not professionals, as well as the maestros themselves being known to buy materials of cheaper quality. Ideally, the plan moving forward would be for this government, or the next, to leave personal interest aside and invest in renewable energy sources that the country has the potential to take advantage of. If there's a severe lack of funds, then similarly to what was done with the armed conflict, EVA, or VAT, funds should be allocated for the development of the energy sector. If that's not possible or not enough, then maybe it's time for some of the less than useful people in Congress who are earning $6,000 or more and seem to know nothing of the hardships of everyday Ecuadorians to leave, so that that money can go into things that actually make the country better. It would also be great if current governments left their pride, or whatever it is that they have, aside and acknowledged previous works from previous governments and ensured that these functioned optimally. Unfortunately, while that would be ideal, the reality that I'm foreseeing is more along the lines of putting some tape or glue on the problem and hoping that it holds out long enough for elections to roll by. At that point, we either A, vote for the same person and everyone's really mad because nothing changes, or they're moderately mad because the reality is that fixing a deficit that's the result of years of corruption is almost like something out of an anime. You're not just gonna snap your fingers and it's all resolved. Or B, we vote for someone else, and most of the options so far feel like either future corruption or possibly sending the country back a few years so that we'll have to face this problem once again in the future. And you might not like it, it might sound terrible, but it's just the reality of how things are over here. And the people will blame everything: the president, nature, God. But truly, the country won't get better unless the people themselves get better. And which reminds me of what the ex-president Lenín Moreno once said.
Algún momento una persona me manifestó Y me lo dijo de forma frontal, como acostumbra la gente, ojalá tuviéramos un mejor presidente. Yo les dije, ojalá tuviera yo un mejor pueblo también.
So I do believe that the blackouts will resume at some point in 2025. I sure hope that they don't, but they most likely will. But is that a reason for you not to visit Ecuador? Well, you should definitely check out my Should You Visit Ecuador in 2025 video next, if you want to know my thoughts on that. Thanks for watching, wish Ecuador the best, and as always, ace out.